I'm a firm believer. You do what's right. You don't worry about what the consequences might be.
Hi, this is Beth Dobrzinski with the Stories Project, and we are here today with Tom Patti. Tom lives in Waukesha, actually Wales, I believe it is, according to the
Well,
map.
Village of Waukesha
Okay,
now.
village of Waukesha, with his wife. And Tom was born on August 4th, 1940, in Milwaukee. And prior to retirement, Tom worked for in IT and real estate and pick and save. He retired 3 times. So we're going to start in the beginning. So tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, if we start at the beginning, I was a high school graduate and started university training at UWM for children that were challenged. I wanted to be one of those special ed teachers.
Okay.
Well, at that time, you had to take music appreciation and art appreciation, and it just went on and on and on. And I got fed up with it and decided I was going to work for a living instead. Well, while I was going to the university, I got a part-time job at night working for United Parcel Service. I was sorting packages at night for the delivery drivers during the day. And when I decided that I no longer wanted to go to the university, they were looking for somebody to work in the payroll department of United Parcel. And they decided I'd be a good candidate for that,
Okay.
and they gave me the job. So I went to work in the payroll department, and my predecessor, there was a report that was due at the end of the week, and my predecessor would take the whole week to make this report. Well, it only took me a couple of weeks to say, why do I want to spend the whole week doing this? And I'd have it done on Monday after we wrote the payroll. Well, somebody recognized this and asked me if I wanted to go work in the industrial engineering department
Wow.
of United Parcel. And sure. And they decided that they needed a brand new programmer down in the IT department. So, okay, I took a test and they decided I was going to be the candidate. There were 33 of us, 3 from each of 11 different territories, and I got elected to move to St. Charles, Illinois, to be a programmer. Well, before I could go, I had to go down to IBM to do some programmed instruction, they called it in those days. Went ahead and went down to Chicago on a Monday morning, and they handed me a book, well, yay thick, on programming the 1401. In my day, that was a big computer, and we had a big one. It was 16K.
Wow.
And they had to make an appointment to go back for testing on the first book. So I made it. They said, we do the testing on Thursdays. Okay. I made an appointment for Thursday. I came home. I opened the book. I read the book. I went back on Thursday and I aced the test.
Wow.
They handed me book 2. Book 2, yay big, 8.5 by 11 by yay. I went ahead, read the book over the weekend, and I went back on Monday. Took the test, aced it. Well, you know the rest of this story. Went back on Thursday, went back on Monday, went back on Thursday. I finished all 4 books. Boom, 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 boom. And we moved to St. Charles, Illinois. And our office was right straight across the street from the river in St. Charles. And while I was down there, they only made 2-size machines in that day. It was up to a 16K machine, 8, or 16. And they had a 64K 1410, which we did not have. Okay, so I'm learning to program and whatnot in the regional accounting office, and I'm doing very well. Really like it. I had found something I really like to do. Well, our machine was small, so I learned to do it in machine language rather than using programming language, autocoder at that time. I could program in machine language and the like. So this goes on and whatnot. And one day, one of the people from the regional industrial engineering department came out to the accounting office, and he knew who I was and whatnot, and we talked and whatnot. And I said to him, by the way, that report I used to always send you from the payroll department, what did you do with them after we sent them? And he looked at me and he laughed and he opened the bottom drawer on the desk and he says, we threw them in there and closed the drawer. I said, what? And the report was, it took time to do because it was a leveling between pickup volume and delivery volume for all the branches and whatnot. And I said, you can't be serious. He said, the volume of information and the time it took to do anything with it was too long. And what they wanted to do was the same thing across all of the districts for the region, but it was too time consuming to do. I said, oh, so he's upstairs in the accounting department and whatnot. And I go down and I punch some cards. At that time, we were all IBM cards like that. And I went ahead and I just put in some pickup volumes and some delivery volumes and whatnot. And I ran it through the computer. And when he came downstairs, I said, I got something to show you. And he says, what? And here I had 20 cards from the 20 districts of delivery volume, 20 cards of pickup volume, and they got read into the computer. We had card readers then, and about a minute later, paper starts coming out of the printer. Pass 1, pass 2, pass 3. Within a period of about 5 minutes, here's all this information spread, done, what used to take me pretty much a day to do. They never did anything with. I had managed to write him a program while he was up in the accounting department, and it came out in a matter of about 5 minutes. I says, here's your answer. And he just looked at me. Huh? He was just elated because that information was important but too hard to deal with. Well, the man I worked for had come from American Airlines in the IT department, and he just got so upset with me because he was using that as an argument to get a bigger computer. And I just blew his chances for a bigger computer. Well, we didn't get along too well there after that. And I went in for the interview, and a fellow by the name of Paul Spangenberg was running the department. And Paul was a former IBM programmer and was involved in writing at that time what was known as a bill of material processor, which was the piece of software for manufacturing. It was the thing to do. And I interviewed with him, and he was excited, and he hired me. So we left, and we came back to Milwaukee, and I went to work for George Meyer. Paul was a genius, an absolute genius. And he took me under his wing and taught me. I have nothing but praise for that man. And the funniest story I can tell about George Meyer, they went through a savings program, an austerity program, and you couldn't get anything. Well, I had all these manuals and ring binders and whatnot, and I would always get to know the people that worked, get to know the floor sweeper, get to know the maintenance man and whatnot. And I had all this stuff around, and one day I happened to mention to one of the maintenance people, yeah, I got all these things, but we couldn't get anything because they weren't on a austerity program. And I went home for the weekend, and when I came back in on Monday morning, I had cherry wood shelving, which they used for making forms and whatnot, across my wall for all my manuals and ring binders and whatnot. That's probably my favorite story. But anyways, to go on, worked for Paul for a couple of years, and Paul and two other people from IBM formed a company, a consulting company here in the Milwaukee area, a manufacturing consulting company, MRM, Manufacturing Resource Methods. Well, anyways, Paul left, and the controller of the company, Walter Leach, another one of these that, and let the silence describe him and whatnot, came in, and I'm going to show you people now how to run this department. And we were a very successful department, flexing his muscles. And he went ahead and he lit into me because I was the good friend of Paul. And I looked at him and I said, Walter, I may have to work for you. I don't have to respect you. Within an hour, I was in the Human Resources office. And I think you can probably guess what happened. Well, before I left the building, I picked up the phone and I called Paul. And I said, well, Paul, I'm looking for a job. Paul says, just stay close. I get a call back within minutes from rep from IBM, salesman, our salesman from IBM. And he says, Tom, you've got an interview at Ellis Chalmers over on 70th and Greenfield. Oh, okay. So I drove over. I went in to the corporate offices. I sat down. They interviewed me. And at 2 o'clock in the same afternoon, I was at a desk in Ellis Chalmers in the IT department.
Wow.
So I'm working at Ellis Chalmers in the corporate IT department and whatnot. I was given the responsibility of maintaining the payroll system. The payroll system every time they ran it, every week, I'd get a phone call in the middle of the night that they had a program bust. It was an old 1401 program running under compatibility, and it depended on all of the cards being in perfect sequential order. And if they weren't, it would bust. So we called it the bust table. I'd go back in the morning, see it on the table, say, resort the cards. It was just a sort error.
Wow.
Run it again. So after I did this a few times, I said, well, this is absolute insanity. So I asked the operations department to load the programs and take a core dump. They did that for me, threw them on my desk, because I knew how to write in machine language. I went through and I substituted reading cards. I patched it to read tape. We had these great big tape machines at that time.
Sure.
Went ahead, wrote a program, read the cards, sort them on tape. Now it's a mechanical sort. And instead of reading cards in the programs, read tape. Read the tape. I never had to go to the bus table again. Well, you know the rest of this story already. The manager of the corporate IT department's all upset. He was trying to get him to buy a new 360.
So there's a pattern here.
And he was using the payroll, because it's a very important program, to justify this and whatnot. Well, I fixed it, and the payroll department was no longer interested because it would run every day. Well, there was some friction, and this isn't the place to be and whatnot. And lo and behold, I get a call from New York. Vice President calls me and says, Tom, forget Chicago. And we hadn't moved yet. We still had our house here on the Root River Parkway. He went and he says, come see me in New York. So I flew up to New York, and I walk into the corporate office. He's in a meeting. I sat and I sat and I sat. Finally, they said, Tom, you got to stay overnight. So I had nothing but myself. I went out and bought some fresh underwear and a shirt and whatnot.
Right.
And whatnot. Went to see him next morning, and he says, when you coming? I said, when am I coming? What? And he says, you're going into Wayne, New Jersey. That was the corporate data processing department.
Wow.
And he said, we've got problems, and I know you'll fix them and whatnot. Okay, so here we come, Wayne, New Jersey. The mover shows up and says, you're going to Palatine, Illinois? No, we had bought a house down there, which in itself was a story, that we had bought a house with a lot of difficulty, and at that time, interest rates were 16%.
Oh, my.
And I managed to assume a loan at 6. We had difficulty getting into it. The attorney for the sellers was a pain in the butt. We went down and we had closed on it. We're in the closing room, and at that time, buyers and sellers were in the same room, not like today.
Sure.
And Judy, my wife, is just digging her fingers into my hand, my need to control my mouth and whatnot. And we go through the closing and whatnot. And we get done and they hand me the keys. And our salesman's at the end of this big long table and whatnot. And I stand up and I take the keys and I throw them across the table and I say, sell the damn house. I'm moving to New Jersey. And I look at this attorney and I ream him out. And I look at the sellers and say, I could have walked away from my $500 down payment. Much easier. And they had bought a KOA campground and were anxious to
Sure.
move and whatnot. And I said, but I did the honorable thing.
Yes,
So
you did.
we bought it. We never moved into it. The mover shows up and we tell him, no, New Jersey. He says, where? Have no idea. Call us when you get there.
So
he
you
said-
hadn't bought a house yet in New Jersey.
We hadn't even been there yet.
Oh my gosh.
He says, I haven't been home for a month. Do you mind if I go home? He lived down in southern Ohio. No, I take all the time you want. We drove to New Jersey, picked up a paper, started seeing if we could find something and whatnot, and ran across an ad for a winterized cottage on Upper Greenwood Lake that an attorney owned, a young attorney. We called him, we met him, we went and looked at it. It was great. It was all winterized. It was nice, whatever. I called the mover and said, this is where you're going to. Oh, okay.
That would never happen today.
Yep. There was one winter day I was supposed to go down to Illinois for a meeting with the corporate people and whatnot, and we got a storm up here. So I called and said, I'm not coming. I said, we've got a bad snowstorm up here. Well, they didn't down in the Chicago area. So when I went down for the next meeting, a couple of the guys said to me, Tom, he's out after you because you didn't come to the last meeting and whatnot. And I said, we had a storm. It didn't storm down here. And I said, well, okay. So I always carry a pocket knife. I took the pocket knife out and I laid it on the table. And we're all sitting there waiting for the honcho. And he comes in and he looks at me. And I pick up the knife and I open it up and I said, I understand. And he breaks out laughing and whatnot. And that was the end of it. The owners were always solidly behind me because problem, ask Tom, he'll fix it and whatnot. So went ahead. Eventually, I was in charge of all but one of the regions. We had 6 of them. I had 5 of them. The one guy that didn't like me had his one in the east. And it was shortly thereafter that we had been bought by the French. And I was in what we call the Rencontre in Grenoble. And I was one of the top 10 companies, and we had over 250 accounting units, and had managed to whip them into profitability and doing
successful.
whatever. And we had been bought by the French. Then the French bought another company on the East Coast. That fella became the president of the American operation. Another one of these where I want my boy, not the one that I've got. And I was executive VP of the American company at that time. And we were in New York at a executive meeting. And Mr. East Coast there that wanted his boy, not Tom, lashing into me again. And that's when I went and said, I may have to work for you, but I don't have to respect you. And I got up and I walked out of the meeting and I said, I'm going home. I'm down working with one of the administrative assistants to get my airlines tickets changed. and the corporate attorney comes running down the hall, and says, "Tom, I just talked to Serge," and Serge says, "Tom, go home. It's summer in Paris. Nobody's at work here. We'll call you. You're on the payroll. Just go home and wait for a phone call." And I came home for 2 months on the payroll. And one day I get a phone call from Serge's office saying, "Serge wants to see you in Paris." Oh, okay. I fly to Paris. I go into the building. Our building was one of the Napoleon III chateaus on the Arc de Triomphe and whatnot. And I'm waiting, and they say, "While you're waiting, go see the president of the European group." So we go over and we chat and we blah, 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 blah. And finally, the president of Europe says, "Let's go eat some lunch. Heavens only knows when Serge is going to be available." So we go across the street to eat lunch. And a little while after we're there, here comes Serge. They say, "Serge has never been in any of these restaurants." Serge Kampf owned 85%, 89% of the $2 billion company and whatnot. And he walks up to me and says, "When are you coming?" And I looked at him, I said, "When am I coming what?" And he looks at the president of Europe and he says, "When's he coming?" And he says, "As soon as he can get here." That was
your job offer.
That was my job offer. I'm coming to Europe. I spent a couple months over there, and then we moved. Company moved over there. The wife of the European president found us a wonderful apartment out in the suburb of Paris and whatnot. And I spent 5 years there. I spent the first two and a half, 3 years in Group Europe. And then we started a university. And I went into the university as a vice president of the university. And we would bring in all of our branch managers, regional managers, district managers, and we would train them in how to run their companies profitably and whatnot. And I had learned a trick on profitability from a Frenchman. When we were here in the U.S. and we had a French president, he brought over a young man to run our Western region. And that young man said to me one day, "People read numbers left to right." Okay. So he says, when I quote a rate, he said, I remember that. So where our branch managers and salespeople, and at that time we would quote things in the $20 range. Keep in mind, this is back in the 80s and whatnot. Right. $20. $20.50. He said, they read them from left to right. They concentrate on the beginning, not the end. And I thought about that, and I started getting, at that point, I was in charge of the Midwest region. I got all of my managers and salespeople. No, you don't, it's not $20, it's $20.50, $20.75, $20.79. The amount of money that added, and it was all profit, all to the bottom line, was phenomenal. And that's how, like when we were in France, I was one of the top 10 out of over 200 accounting units in the company. We lived near Versailles. We were into Versailles. The went to all these rencontres, they were called, which were corporate meetings every other year. I've been to Morocco. I've rode a camel, ate lamb and a lot of other things. Went into the souks where the sun is so hot. The restaurant is nothing more than a table with a sheet of stainless steel on it, and they put the food on the stainless steel,
And it cooks it.
and it cooks it
Wow.
and whatnot. And the special handling when I went to Morocco, because I was an American, not a European,
Sure.
and whatnot. Dusseldorf, that's when I was still with the American company. And I had something I smile about. When one of my managers or salespeople or technicians would do something that had to be recognized. In those days, we wore suits, ties, and wingtips. And I was a 7-day-a-week tie, shirt, white shirt, etc. But I would walk up to them, and I've always carried a pocket knife, and I would walk up, grab their tie, and cut their tie off. And in the wall of my office, I had it lined with ties over the years that I cut off of people's necks.
And what were their reactions? When you're coming at them with a knife.
Once it got established, it was an indication of, I don't know, I'm searching for a word, recognition. It was a happy moment for him. So
Okay.
there was always smiles.
Okay.
And I'll tell in a moment a story about somebody I did it to. But I collected all of these ties. Well, we're at a rencontre in Dusseldorf, and we're taking a break after lunch, and we're walking on the streets, several of us, and lo and behold, Serge Kampf, the owner of this company, is on the street, and he walks up to me and he says, "Tom, I'm curious. Why haven't you ever cut my tie off?" Well, in France, Serge Kampf is like king. You bow down, you very respected, very, very respected person and whatnot. But definitely there's a caste system and whatnot. And I looked at him. I took the knife out of my pocket and I walked up to him and I cut off his tie. And where my tie, maybe if I had an expensive one, maybe cost $10, his probably cost $200 and whatnot. And the people I was with and everybody, because there were many of us out on the street just taking a break, just let out a gasp. That crazy American walked up to Serge and cut off his tie and whatnot. Serge just elated. He had known about what I did in recognition of people, and I had a lot of ties, I assure you, and whatnot. Well, that became a story in itself about the crazy American. I found a real exclusive type tie that I figured the kind he wore.
Right.
And who remembered 20 years later what tie they had on. So I brought it home and I cut the top off of it and whatnot and took it with me. We're in Rio having a gathering in the late afternoon and whatnot. And Serge, he had a caretaker.
Mm-hmm.
He came in and he saw me. And I went over and I had the tie. And I had it in a tie box.
Yeah, we wrapped
With
it
a bow
all
and
around.
whatnot.
Did all that.
I took it over and I handed it to him. He opened the box, and in here is this tie. And he just broke out and whatnot. He was just overjoyed because
Oh.
he remembered the incident and whatever. And the next day, we were up on the mountain. We took one of the tours, and the wife of the European president, Chris Ugander, says, "Tom, you didn't see Serge's face when you did that. He was just so elated." But
Made his
we
day.
were good friends. Well, we're in France. We're there for 5 years. We leave. All kinds of experiences, all kinds of favorable things. We ate in, I think, 4 of the 5-star restaurants
Nice.
while we were over there as guests and whatnot. They just treated us fantastically. Nothing but good. The experiences of shopping in the markets, Judy saw a lot more than I did. We took our refrigerator with us. The apartments, the refrigerators were more like beverage coolers, and that's what we used ours for. And that was the talk of the area, that these Americans had this big refrigerator, but that's what we were used to. Because
Sure.
what can you put in the little one? But these people are used to going to the market every day
Right.
and bringing home what they're going to eat today, and don't need much storage space. And you could buy an American refrigerator over there, but you better be prepared to spend $3,000-4,000 or more. Sometimes I would fly for a meeting over in France, go to a half-hour meeting and get back on a plane and fly back home. At and the stories too. I remember I was in Germany where I was meeting a customer that wanted to do a conversion, and we went to dinner, and I asked the waiter for ice water, ICE water. I didn't spell it. I just said ice water. Well, I got a glass of hot water. He couldn't understand why I wanted ice is hot.
So you met Judy though in high school, and then you worked with her, and then when did you start dating and then get married?
Now, I graduated in 1958. She graduated, she's a year behind me.
Okay.
So I was a senior in 58, a junior in 57. So I met her at the beginning of the 56-57
Okay.
school year in Latin class. I had taken 2 years of French. I went to the Latin class because I knew of her and whatnot and wanted to get to know her. So I took Latin. I only took 1 semester of it though, and whatnot. And
So you had an ulterior motive there.
yeah, she invited me to a, what was the name of the, she should be here to tell us what the name of that group she belonged to. It was a church group, and I forget the name of it. Ask me in 5 minutes.
Judy, what's the name of the church group?
Job's Daughters.
Job's
It
Daughters.
was a ball.
Daughters. It was a
It was
ball.
their
And she asked me to that. Well,
That was your first date? You
Yeah.
asked Tom out?
Yeah.
Go, girl.
and I don't know, but when it came to prom time, she had a date with somebody else, and I went and asked somebody else, and I don't know, and just time goes by.
Sure.
And I don't know. I pursued her. I really don't know. She can tell you more of that story than I can.
By the time I graduated from high school, we were together.
You were together. Okay.
Oh yeah, but a lot of fond memories. Well, eventually we come back. It's 1990, December 31st of 1990. I left CAP. All of my experiences, the companies I worked for, I look very favorably
Sure.
on the people I worked for till we ended up getting some of the politically oriented rather than whatever type of management. And I'm just not that type of person.
You're very
I'm
direct.
a believer, and I'm direct, and I believe you do what's right and what's appropriate, not. And it really never hurt me. I can look back and say it helped me all the way. Well, we come back. We still had the house. When we went to France, we didn't sell the house. Our daughter was in North Carolina. Her husband was in the military. He was now discharged. They moved back. He went to school, to college. She had not wanted to go to college. She had gotten a hairdresser.
Okay.
She graduated as a hairdresser. While she was in the Carolinas, she decided she didn't want to do that for the rest of her life. They came back, and she went to nursing school.
Oh.
And when they were moving back, we said, well, the house is sitting there, and there's not all the furniture, but there's certainly a lot of furniture in there. We didn't take that much. Move into the house. So they moved into the house and took care of the bills and whatnot.
So you went through then the crash of 2008.
Yes. And that's when I started spending more time at home. The internet had just started to find its way, and people were starting to use that, and it was easier to go on the internet than it was to call a salesperson and whatnot. And while I was somewhat aggressive, I wasn't terribly aggressive. We're comfortable and whatnot. Went ahead, and it was slowing down. And you were doing an awful lot of chasing. People would see something on the internet, and they'd call you.
Sure.
And trying to press them into making a decision. And I would come home, and Judy would say, who did you talk out of buying a house today? Because I would be up straight. Now,
Sure.
before you decide whether you want this house or not, recognize that that street over there is a very busy street. Recognize that the landscaping all is running toward the house. I never sold a house that I regretted selling the people to. because I'd be straight up with them about what the problems might be.
Right.
I had one in Wauwatosa, a couple that came from Los Angeles. He was going into a resident program over at Children's Hospital, the Fredericton. And I went and I told him, I said, you know, you're only a half a block away from Wisconsin Avenue, and that's a noisy street. He says, we come from Los Angeles. He says, every street is noisy. And they bought the house.
They bought the house. And then you have 2 grandchildren?
One of each. Brittany and Brandon. Brandon is a Walworth County sheriff. His wife is a special ed teacher. They live in Delavan.
So they're
5
close.
minutes for him to go over to the sheriff's department, and she's a teacher in East Troy, so she's got 20 minutes. Brittany is married to Dee. They live in a condo in Pewaukee, a quadplex and whatnot. Our son lives in Warrenville, Illinois. He owns an electronics design company and a chip manufacturing facility in North Carolina, I think. I never can get South and North Carolina straightened out. Our daughter is a managing partner for Optum. Optum, the big United Healthcare company.
Sure.
They own multiple divisions and whatnot. And she's in the consulting division, and she goes to hospitals and straightens out hospitals to get them to run correctly and decently and whatnot. She is a nurse, or was a nurse. I don't know which would be more appropriate way of saying it now.
And how far apart were they?
4 years.
Okay.
4 years apart. The deceased daughter was in the middle of Susan Elizabeth.
Okay. And then growing up, those 2, did they get along? Were they good friends? Were they mischievous? Were they?
I don't think they were mischievous, but yeah, they had their. It wouldn't be unusual to find Bob on the living room carpet with his head up against the dog and whatnot, and Brittany. Bob would cater to Brittany. She's got a brass belt on. We're very proud of our kids and our grandchildren. They've been very successful in their own careers. The most trouble that they've ever been in is next door to Brandon out in Eagle when he was young. A couple of devilish kids next door, and they roped him into they put a firecracker in a mailbox.
Oh.
And anyways, the sheriff showed up. But that's the extent of any of the problems that we had. And that probably was enough influence that he wanted to become a sheriff. I don't know.
Maybe that defined his path.
Yeah, and they've done very well on their own. They're every one of them is very successful and makes us very proud. Tiffany's a recognized authority in her field now. She's developed some systems that are recognized as being the epitome, and their company has just got so much business. They are the authority to go to as a result of what she's developed. Bob is recognized as world's authority on 3D technology,
Okay.
and he frequents places throughout the world giving speeches, and at
Fascinating.
one time he was an authority for court cases and whatnot.
Oh, wow.
They've all excelled. Mother brought him up good. Father was on an airplane. One day she said,
Tell that
one
story.
day she says to me, I get tired. All you do is come home, and then I've got to spend all weekend doing laundry. So then what we did is we doubled the luggage, and I had two completely different sets. And I would come home and exchange, leave this week's and take next week's with me. And I would put 350,000 miles
Wow.
on a plane, 65,000 on a car, and whatnot, and then trains and buses and everything else when I was traveling. Or when we first went to France, we went into one of their equivalent of a bodega here in the U.S., and we bought a bottle of wine, and we sat down on the curb at a green area, and we're drinking the wine on the street, and it was the worst bottle of wine that you probably ever have. Judy's been to the Louvre. I was there for 5 years and never got into the Louvre. It something always, but did get a lot of places. Been to Greece at a rencontre. Been to Morocco. Been to Germany. What are some of the Grenoble? We had one. All over kinds of places that way, and I've been to just about every country. Well, I've been to every Western European country and whatnot.
If there was a place you could go now, where would you go?
Nowhere.
What would you want to say to your great-grandchildren, great-great-grandchildren about this day and age, about life? Do you have any parting words of wisdom?
I think I'd just repeat myself what I said earlier. Do what's right. Don't do what's easy. Don't do what's politically correct for yourself. Do the right thing. Because in the end, the consequences will all turn out in your favor. And that's my advice to my children. I think we've raised them that way. Our grandchildren, and they've been raised that way. Great-grandchildren, if we get any. I quite frankly cannot look back at anything I've done in my 81 plus years that I regret or look at and say, would I do it differently? I don't think so. I always did it with a reason, something I believed in, something I was willing to pay the consequences of if there were some. And I guess I got lucky because I lucked out, to use those words. I've got a good marriage. Yeah, we argue and whatnot. After it's going to be 60 years next year,
Congratulations.
and whatnot. And like I say, I tolerate her, and she says she tolerates me. is what it is. I've got a great family and whatnot. We can be very proud of all of them. Good family.